Hey, my name's Jonathan, and I'm a veteran.
Hi, my name is Daryl, and I'm a veteran.
My name is Chad, and I'm a veteran.
Hey, I'm Travis. I'm an Air Force veteran.
Hi, my name's Ashley, and I'm a veteran.
Well, hello, everybody. Happy Sunday, and welcome to Conversations with a Vet. I have a great guest waiting in the wings. But before we get to my guest tonight, I want to shout out to everybody who is jumping on. Travis, thank you so much. Jason, as always, thank you for being here. And everybody who joins in at later on, again, thank you all. Thank you all for your support. We're in the process of setting up a time and a day that's going to work for our 500 subs. So, and Travis was a great support system to help me get over that. So we're going to be giving away several of these autographed books behind me. And then we have some other things that we will be giving away as well, but you must be present to win. So pay attention to the page. If you haven't already, please subscribe and hit that notification bell so that you don't miss out on any of the content. So, all right. And also, before I forget, so next Sunday, I will not have a show because I am going to be with my husband at the air show in Smyrna, Tennessee. And I am going to be helping to raise money for the Tun Tavern rebuild in Pennsylvania. So just want to make sure you guys are all aware of that. All right. So without any further ado, please, everybody, help me welcome Gina Alderman.
Yay.
Hello. How are you doing tonight?
Well, first I want to say I'm Gina Alderman, and I am a veteran. I loved your intro. I loved your intro.
Thank you. Great. I told you you'd like it.
You did, and I loved it.
So I always start out by asking who my interviewee was when they were young. So who was Gina when you were a child? What were you like?
Well, I'll start out by saying my father was active duty Navy for 22 years and 10 months, and he retired as a Master Chief, which is the highest enlisted rank you can go. And I was born as a result of him and my mother meeting and getting married in San Francisco, California, which is where he was stationed at the time. And when I was 6 months old, we moved over to the East Coast, and I grew up there in Virginia in the Norfolk area for about 5 years. My sister was born, and then my two brothers were born at a later time. So as a young child, I loved reading. I was very curious and inquisitive, asked a lot of questions. And my mom said I was very independent, and I wasn't the type of child that needed to be held a lot, and just very inquisitive, curious, and, always asking why.
Nice. Did you enjoy school? Were you studious?
I enjoyed school. I think initially for the social activity. I can remember the first day I went to preschool. And I had a brother that was 13 years old, so I didn't have any siblings close to my age at 5. So all of a sudden I was surrounded by, all these other little kids at the age of 5. And so from the social perspective, I really enjoyed it. And then when I got into first grade, again, I was always asking why. So my teachers, we split our first grade class. And I got put in the class with the other Y students, with a teacher that had more advanced experience, to deal with the inquisitive type students. And
nice.
But I loved it. I thrived. I wasn't probably the best academic student initially, but I got involved in team sports like basketball, softball, volleyball.
Good.
And it
so
also
what?
carried.
If I can interrupt, what position did you play? Because I love baseball. Baseball, I've always loved it. So what position did you play in softball?
I played catcher and second base.
Rock on. Catcher's my favorite position. Now, I couldn't do it, but I always love watching the catchers. I think they're the heart of the team. So
It's really hard on your knees, but
it is. And back then, they didn't have the knee savers either. Those little wedges when you bend down, when you're hunkered down.
we did not.
So it's good, obviously, you were in sports, that you had done sports. And you did them all through high school, or?
I did. I started in sixth grade. We lived in rural southern Arkansas. At that time, my parents divorced when I was 5. So my mother took custody of my 13-year-old brother. Myself was 5 and my sister was 2. So we moved to a small community outside of El Dorado, Arkansas. And it was almost like a private school because we only had 18 to 20 kids in each grade, kindergarten through senior high. And so the only sport we had, at least in school sport, was basketball. And then the summer sport was baseball or softball. So I became an athlete without being planned. Like today, where parents enroll kids in whether it's gymnastics or, some kind of sports. That was just what we did in school. Our PE was basketball, and I thrived. I loved team sports, and that's kind of one of the things that led me to the military.
That was my next question. So, excuse me. So obviously with your dad being prior military, it makes sense, but to hear that your sports being in a team setting helped you also come to a conclusion that that's what you wanted to do. So my question then would be, when you were deciding to join the military, did you already say in your head, I know enough about the Navy, that's where I'm going to go? Or did you go to different recruiters for the different branches first?
So it's interesting. So from the age of 5 until the age of 15, I had very limited contact with my father. I didn't see him maybe more than like 5 minutes at a time, 3 different times. And so when I was 15, I went to visit him. My sister and I did for 2 weeks. And he was a recruiter, a Navy recruiter at the time, in his hometown of Knoxville, Tennessee. He's an East Tennessee boy, born and raised. And I got to go with him to the office and learned a lot about the Navy. And I really yearned to have a connection with him. So when I started talking to him about joining the military, he actually advised me, interestingly enough. Now this is 1983. He actually advised me to go enlisted in the Air Force, because he was thinking, I think, from the standpoint of, do I want my little girl chipping paint on a ship with a bunch of dirty, foul-mouthed sailors?
Yeah, right.
So that was his advice, and I took it. And later, after 7 years of service, I received, going to school at night, part-time, and every other weekend, I received a degree in healthcare administration, and I applied then to become a naval officer in the Navy. So I served 7 years enlisted Air Force, medical administration, and 21 years Navy as a hospital administrator, for 28 years total.
Okay, so let's go back. So when you made the decision to join the military, you had that path that you wanted to go because of your dad's advice.
Yes.
Okay. What did your mom say about you wanting to join the military?
Well, that's a great question. I've never been asked that question, but my mom was 100% all in and for it, because my father had a very successful career. And what my mom was all about, when she became single and raised 3 kids, she said, Gina, you'll never have to depend on a man for your income, or you'll have to marry, to have a livelihood. So she wanted me to be independent, like she became, but also to be not just independent, but to thrive. And she knew, because I loved books and I was very inquisitive, she felt like I would do very well in the military. So she was 100% all in.
And that's really good, because now you've got support of both parents, right? And I'm assuming your siblings kind of fell into to place there too, and you had support there?
I did. My sister, who was 3 years and 10 months younger, she joined the Army later. My older brother, he had joined the Army, and they both served a couple years. And then my other two brothers that my father had in his second marriage, they chose not to go into the military, but everyone was very supportive of me joining, and mainly, following in our dad's footsteps.
Right. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about your basic training with the Air Force.
Okay.
Because that was your first, right? That's the first step that you took. You went Air Force first.
Yep.
So you already had the stamina built up for the PT side, I would guess. So what was it like for you when you first get to the training base?
Well, so I go back to my recruiter, Staff Sergeant Nelson. I still remember to this day. When I came in, I was married. And when I came into his office, and my husband came in at the time, my husband came in with me, he was not really motivated, first of all, to sign me, because what I learned later, because I became a recruiter, also a medical recruiter, that recruiters they have production goals. And at that time in 1983, they could only put a certain number of women in the military per year. So when I first came into his office, he was kind of lackadaisical and not really motivated. Well, what I learned as a recruiter, as the month goes on, if you're not meeting your production goal, then you have to reach out to people that are in kind of limbo. And I was not officially in delayed entry, but I was kind of in between. So he called me on the last day of the month, and he said, of August of 1983, he said, "I have good news and bad news. The good news is you've been selected to join the Air Force. The bad news is you have 4 hours to get to the bus station in Arkansas, to go to the MEPS in Little Rock, Arkansas, to finish your physical, and to get to Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas." And at that point, I was thinking I was going to be delayed entry for 10 to 12 months. So talk about a culture shock.
And you were how old when you went to Lackland?
So I was 20. I turned 21 in basic training. I went to school part-time. I had a year, 30 college credits. So I was able to go in at a higher rank because I had a year of college. So I was a little bit older. A lot of my basic training, the Navy calls them shipmates, but airmen, were 18, right out of high school.
Yes. So you were one of the older recruits.
I was.
And then how was it? Did they treat you differently? I mean, obviously you're female, and in 83, there's not a lot of them. But were you treated differently because you were older?
The recruits didn't treat me differently, but the drill sergeant put me in a leadership position to be a squad leader. And because I had a year of college, and in fact, she picked everyone that was squad leader or the flight commander. This is what the Air Force calls them. We all had at least a year or two of college. So the only one that really got treated differently, and it's called BMTS, Basic Military Training School. We had one person in our group that was 29, and she ended up getting injured and hurt. And, she was like the old lady of our flight. Now thinking back, 29 is still young, but to a bunch of 18-year-olds, 29 was ancient, and she had a couple kids at home.
Yeah. So you start basic training. What was there an area that you trained that you really enjoyed? Like, for example, the Marine Corps, I can speak of because I've heard the stories from my boys, but they have it broken down. They have their rifle week, and they've got the CS gas, and they've got the rappelling and all those kinds of things. So was there something specific in your training during that time that you really enjoyed?
Oddly enough, I asked to step down from being squad leader because I wanted to be the flag bearer. So the flag is called the guidon.
Yep.
And so I set and because I was shorter, I set the pace. And the reason that the height was important is because I had a shorter stride. So the women up front, the squad leaders, were tall, and then the women in the back were short. So I was selected. I had to train and compete against another airman, and I was selected. And I was so proud to carry the American flag everywhere we went on base. I was carrying the guidon, and especially in the graduation parade when we did the pass and review. And that I carried that with me for 7 years. And every time we had a parade at my first duty station and the second duty station, I volunteered to be in the parade and to be the guidon bearer. And the patriotism and the pride that I felt by carrying that flag was immense joy and honor, and just, it was almost spiritual to me. So oddly enough, we did do the rappelling. We did do the rifle, the M16 training. We did the obstacle course, which I enjoyed. But it was the privilege of carrying the guidon, the American flag, everywhere we went, and guarding the flag. You couldn't just carry it. I mean, you had to guard it, wherever. You couldn't just plop it up against a wall.
No, couldn't lay it down. Nothing. Yes.
Yeah.
Love it. So you graduate from the basic training for the Air Force. And then from there, you go into a school.
Yep.
And that was, what was the name?
So in the Air Force, it's called technical training. And what was interesting was because I was recruited the last day of the month, I went into what they call open general, which meant I could have been put into the Air Force as a cook, because that's one of the categories. But not to brag, but I scored so high on the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery, the ASVAB. I scored 99 in administration, which is almost perfect. So when I was at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas, getting classified, the gentleman was so polite and professional. And he said, "What are you interested in?" He said, "I'll tell you right now, you score really high in administration. You scored 85 in electronics." He said, "We really are short electronic technicians." He said, "But in your heart of hearts, what would you like to do?" I said, "I'd like to work in a hospital, but I don't want to necessarily do patient care like a medic or a corpsman. Do you have anything in a hospital medical administration?" And they did. And he said, "Absolutely. And we have openings." And he said, "I can make you today a medical administration specialist," which that decision in that moment basically designed, my destiny for the next 28 years, and including today.
Right. And that it's really an amazing field too, right? Just in general. And when you think about it, and helping other people who can't do for themselves at that moment.
Absolutely.
So.
And it's amazing as a healthcare specialist or healthcare administrator, you may not be in direct patient care, but I had 13 duty stations, and I learned that you have a lot of power and control over making a significant difference in the life, not just a day for inpatients, but of the life of a patient, and I thrived in that field. I did very well.
Nice. And so once you finish your training there, and you talked about being, having 13 duty stations, where did you go next?
So once I finished tech school, I received orders to Kunsan, Korea. Now, keep in mind, I was married, and the recruiter said, because we asked, what are the odds that maritally we would be separated? And so he gave us the odds, and it was so funny because he said, when my ex-husband was sitting there, he said, "Yeah, worst case scenario, you get orders to Kunsan, Korea." And I did. I got orders to Kunsan, Korea, which is a company duty station. But when you're in technical school, if you score a certain percentage, you're allowed to the upper, I was to like 10%. If you're in the upper 10% of your class, you're allowed to swap orders. If you can find someone that's willing to swap assignments with you, you can actually do that. So there was a lady in my tech school class. Her name was Alice Showalter. Alice had orders to Austin, Texas, Bergstrom Air Force Base. I'm telling you, that was the best assignment in the world. My husband said he met Alice. He came. What would it take for you to swap orders with my wife? And she said, well, I need to pay my car off. And he said, how much? She said, I have $500 on it. He gave her $500 right there on the spot. She and I went to the personnel office the next day and we swapped orders. She went to Kunsan, Korea. I went to Austin, Texas.
Nice. Okay. Where did you go from there?
So again, not to brag, but I did very, very well. I was one of these type of people energetically that I just embraced. I loved with every fiber of my being, the Air Force, healthcare, helping patients, just doing good for humanity. And I had excellent, exceptional non-commissioned officers and officers in charge. And I had mentors. I mean, if you had just a little bit of an inkling of desire and passion to serve, people were like willing to mentor you and tell you or advise you, I guess is the best word, on what to do next. So I received a couple of awards. I was Airman of the Year for the Tactical Air Command, which I think at the time was 12 Air Force bases. So because I was Airman of the Year, my commanding officer, a physician named Colonel Peavy, he got to know me really well. I worked in the front office in personnel administration, and he had transferred, and he was the Air Training Command Surgeon General. So he was the head doctor for Air Training Command. So of all the training bases in the Air Force. And he called, and I answered the phone, and he said, hey, Gina, he said, this is Colonel Peavy. I'm getting ready to retire down the road in San Antonio, Texas at Lackland Air Force Base. And I wanted to invite you and the first sergeant and the current commander and, a list of people to come to my retirement ceremony. He said, meantime, how are you doing? Is there anything I could do for you? And I said, in fact, there is. I said, I have put in an instructor package to go be a medical administration instructor at Shepherd Air Force Base, Wichita Falls, Texas. And I said, and I went up for an interview in person, and I was told that at the time the Air Force had a moratorium, and the only people coming to instructor duty for that year were people returning from overseas assignments. I said, is it possible, sir, that you could put in a good word for me and help me become an instructor? And by George, he did.
Isn't that great when, you work really hard and that hard work pays off and you have those individuals who help get you over that little hump that you need pushed over, right? So, okay. So you become an instructor. Yeah. So you become an instructor. And how did that go?
So once again, I'm all in with every fiber of my being. Whatever I do, it's like I do it, to the 10th power. And I'm also very spiritual, and my faith is faith-based. And so I, again, thrived because what I found out, I had the ability to have a connection with people in general, especially recruits coming out of basic training, because I remembered what it was like, when I graduated basic training and I went to tech school, and you're still in your fearful phase, right? Fight, flight, or freeze. And did I do the right thing in the Air Force? So I had the opportunity to shape these young men and women right out of basic training, 18, 19 years old, to share with them my experience that I had in my first duty station. And they were all going to be medical administrative specialists just like me. So I just really leaned into it hard. And I also got selected. We had 3 courses that were advanced technical training. The Navy calls it A school and C school. And so the Air Force calls it basic technical school or advanced technical school. So I was selected to teach advanced medical records management, which has to do with coding, looking at doctors' diagnosis and medical records, and, kind of dealing with third-party collections of people wherever in injuries, and, how does the Air Force collect from insurance companies if someone was injured? And it was just a really fascinating career field. And so I got to teach advanced, they were usually staff sergeants, tech sergeants, sometimes master sergeants would come through the advanced school. And it was during that time that I was continuing my education. I went to school part-time, 2 to 4 times nights a week, every other weekend. And so I received a Bachelor of Science in healthcare management, and I enrolled in a Master's of Public Administration during that time. And it was during that duty station that I applied to become, as my father said, get your degree and then apply to come into the Navy. And I chose the career field of Medical Service Corps Hospital Administration.
So that's the time at that point is when you decide you were going to move into the Navy.
Right. And I'll tell you, it was a hard decision because I loved the Air Force. I was in 7 years, and my wing commander, I had to go to him to ask him to sign a waiver for me to end my enlistment so then I could be transitioned into the Navy. And I remember when I walked into his office, he pulled out his desk drawer and he plopped his feet up on his desk drawer and he crossed his arms. He said, Staff Sergeant Trotter at the time was my name. He said, you're not leaving here until you can convince me. Why are you not putting in a Medical Service Corps package in the Air Force to be a hospital administrator? He goes, I don't get it. I looked at your record. He said, you've excelled in both of your duty sections. Your duty stations. You're an excellent instructor. Why would I let you out of the Air Force to go do this? And so I just told him. My parents divorced when I was 5. My dad was career Navy, and my dad advised me to come Air Force. And now I want to follow in my dad's footsteps. I want to join the Navy. And he goes, you got me. He signed my release, and it was done.
Nice. And so did you then have to go through boot camp for the Navy?
I did. So for staff corps officers are non-line officers. A line officer is someone that is a war fighter on the front line on an aircraft carrier or destroyer or a submarine or doing something, on the tip of the spear. So I was a staff corps officer working in a hospital, medical service corps with the nurse corps, with the medical corps physicians, and supply corps. They were also staff officers. Civil engineer corps were staff officers. So I went to a school called Officer Indoctrination School. The difference between Officer Candidate School, OCS, and Officer Indoctrination School, OIS, is I was commissioned prior to attending school. Officer Candidate School, you go through like at a petty officer rate, and you graduate and you become commissioned. So those of us that went to that school already held a rank. We were already sworn in. We just had to complete. And funny enough, they jokingly called it knife and fork school because it was really a professional development school. It wasn't tough. We didn't run obstacle course. We didn't shoot weapons. We didn't do any of the things I did in enlisted basic training in the Air Force. Right. You were all classroom time and you marched to and from the school to your classes. That's it.
Wow. Well, see, you lucked out there, right?
Yeah.
Because just going from, say, the Army, right? You have basic training there. Now, granted, let's say infantry. I'm not sure for the officers, but it could be the same. I don't know. But you go, Army, and you go through basic training, and then you want to go become a Marine, for example. You got to go through boot camp, their boot camp.
Absolutely.
But if you were a Marine going into the Army, you wouldn't have to do the Army's basic training. So,
that's true. That's absolutely true.
So, I always become intrigued when I hear that, one of my guests has been in multiple services. So I always have to ask that question. So you go through your schooling with the Navy, and what is your first duty station there?
Well, it's funny. Just about every duty station I have has a story. So prior to leaving the Air Force, now I have to tell you that story. Just like the enlisted recruiter called me, I have good news and bad news. On the 31st of August, you got selected, but you got 4 hours to get to the bus station. Well, I got a call from the Navy medical recruiter. I was at Shepherd Air Force Base, which is Wichita Falls, northern Texas. And my Navy recruiter worked in Dallas, Texas. I got good news and bad news. And it was the 10th of September, right around that time frame. The good news is you've been on a alternate list since January. You were professionally qualified and selected, but we were waiting for a seat for you to attend school. The bad news is you have 12 days to outprocess the Air Force and get to Newport, Rhode Island, and Officer Indoctrination School. So, and the problem was the Navy didn't give me orders right away. So fortunately, enough of the instructors, I think we'd had something crazy like 14 instructors at the Air Force School of Healthcare Sciences had come into the Navy. So the personnel, federal civilians, knew how to process out of the Air Force and get us into the Navy without orders. We had documentation, a letter from the Naval Recruiting District commanding officer saying this is legit. She's been selected. Orders are forthcoming. So they processed me out. And the Friday before school was to start on Monday, I mean, I was scrambling, to get all the paperwork done, but I got it done. And then I flew. I had 1 day break in service, and I was terrified because had I had an accident,
Wouldn't have been covered.
I would have not been in the Air Force or in the Navy. I was in limbo. So then I flew from Shepherd Air Force Base, Wichita Falls, Texas, to Newport, Rhode Island, to Officer Indoctrination School on Sunday. And once I executed those orders, then I was covered. I was an ensign, and I was good to go. But that 24-hour period, I was kind of biting my nails like, I'm in limbo.
Yeah.
But I got there, I made it safely, and everything went fine.
So from there, you get through your school, and then from there, with the Navy, where did you go from there?
So before I left Shepherd Air Force Base, I received a phone call from a man named Captain Doug DeLong. Now, Captain DeLong and I became very, very good friends when I joined the Navy. And he was what they call, it was an assignment officer, but the Navy calls him a detailer. And Captain Doug DeLong, just like my Navy recruiter and my Air Force recruiter, I got good news and I got bad news. The good news is you're going to Naval Hospital Pensacola, which is the most highly sought after duty station all the duty stations in the entire Navy. The bad news is, and it wasn't really bad, but you're going there as something called a risk manager. We're putting you in a position that I had no training for, I had no knowledge of, and it normally is a position held by a lawyer, by an attorney. So I had a huge learning curve when I got to Naval Hospital Pensacola. I remember when I first got there, I called a civilian hospital and talked to the risk manager and said, I need to come over for some on-the-job training because I have no clue what I need to be looking at. And although you're not military, you're civilian. And I need to figure out really quick. I need to get up to speed real quick about what it is a risk manager does. And this guy was brilliant. He was wonderful. He took me under his wing, and he was a good old boy from the South, a little bit, redneck. And that was okay because I'm from the South, and we meshed really good. And basically, bottom line was you look at situations in the hospital that occur, whether it be needle stick incidences or patient falls or a mistake in the operating room, and you essentially evaluate the risk level to the patient, but also to the medical team that created the incident. And man, it was the best job I could have had as a brand new hospital administrator in the Navy.
So obviously you thrived. I mean, to have been in that field for such a long period of time anyway. But so how long did you stay at the Pensacola base?
So you're typical as a naval officer, your assignments can range anywhere from 2 to 4 years. So the Naval Hospital is considered, it's a shore-based command, and it's considered shore duty. So typically the Navy rotations are shore duty, sea duty, shore duty, sea duty. So I stayed 4 years, and it was perfect because it gave me the opportunity to get my graduate degree, which is a requirement to go from, so the rank is ensign, lieutenant junior grade, lieutenant, lieutenant commander, which is like second lieutenant, first lieutenant, captain, major in the other 3 services. So you have to have a graduate degree in order to make 04, which in my case was lieutenant commander. And I knew my best chance to complete my graduate degree was while I was on shore duty. Even though at sea, you still can take graduate schools. So I pushed myself pretty hard. They don't usually like you to go to school, your first year because you're learning how to be a naval officer, or in the Air Force, you know, how to do your job. So I had to wait the first year, but then I started chunking away at it, and I went to school again, just like I did the Air Force, 4 nights a week, every other weekend. And I was so used to that. So for 10 years, my first 7 Air Force, and my first 3 to 4 years Navy, and I got a Master's of Science in Management. And so, but I didn't just stop. I was a risk manager for 15 months. And then my supervisor, so you have the commanding officer, the executive officer, and then you have, in a hospital, you have a person called the director for administration. The DFA, or director for administration, is over the hospital administrators as far as assignment internally, as well as, you know, professional development, as well as your next duty station. So he asked me, brought me in when it was time for my annual evaluation. And he said, "What are you interested in doing here in the hospital other than what you've been doing for 15 months? And I said, well, in the Air Force, I loved a specific area of the hospital called patient administration. And that's what I taught in instructor school. I taught in enlisted medical, you know, specialist, as well as advanced medical records management. So he said, absolutely. He says, we have a 4-week school in Bethesda, Maryland. He said, we're going to send you to this, it's called Patient Administration School, for 4 weeks in Bethesda, Maryland. And when you come back, you're going to be the department head for, you know, the Naval Hospital Pensacola for inpatient and outpatient administration. And I loved the school. The school was fantastic. And I came back, and I took a lot of notes in school. So when I came back and I was doing my turnover with the person I was relieving, I had like 5 pages of questions to ask her, you know, related to what my duties would become. And it made her job so much more simple in doing the turnover, because I kind of led the turnover by asking her all these prompting questions. So it just took us like 2 days to do the turnover, which normally could have taken 2 or 3 weeks.
Wow. And okay, so how long then were you in that position, that role?
So that role was, so it was 4 years, 90 to 94, 15 months as risk manager, and the rest of the time as the department head for inpatient and outpatient administration. But what they did is really interesting. So during that time, there was a big change in Department of Defense medicine, a huge change. One of probably the biggest changes, you know, to date. So we're talking about 90 to 94. And it wasn't just medicine, but it was the line commands, in that the Secretary of Defense was being taken to task, as all the other agencies, you know, secretaries, that you need to create a business plan. You need to run your organizations as if it's a business, and you need to get your businesses in the black, not in the red. And you need to figure out how to be successful, how to cut costs, and essentially, you know, perform at the highest peak of efficiency. And so because I came in during that time, I like to use the term tip of the spear, because I got the quickest education. I was sent to these 1 and 2 and 3 week schools, and I was part of the team for Naval Hospital Pensacola to figure out, how are we going to do this? And it was much bigger than that. It was, how are we going to partner with Keesler Air Force Base and the Army bases in our geographical area? So it was almost like the southeastern part of the United States became under like one regional medical command. And they put me in charge of a team. And again, I'm very junior. I'm just like an 02 now, lieutenant junior grade. But I got to be put in charge of a team. And that's the thing, the nuance that's different between the Air Force and the Navy. Chief petty officers in the Navy do what officers do in the Air Force. So I was performing at probably equivalent in the Air Force, like a major and a lieutenant colonel level, as a lieutenant JG, which is a 02. And I got to network with the Air Force hospital, and I got to network with the Army hospital, and we figured out TRICARE changed. It was a huge change, shift in, it used to be called CHAMPUS, and then it became TRICARE. And then we had to figure out, what is TRICARE standard, you know, what is the different levels, TRICARE there were 3 levels, and how were we going to execute the medical plan? Like, how many dependents or beneficiaries, they call them, could we treat capacity wise? Obviously our mission was active duty always, but then active duty family members, and then retirees, and then retiree family members. And I actually had to manage. So we had these clinics, and I want to say we had like 31 areas of the hospital where patients could be treated. And I had to manage what's called the capacity of what each clinic could handle in a quarter. And so we had these town hall meetings where I would have to go with the commanding officer, who was a physician. She was a Navy captain who later became admiral. And I would be there, kind of feeding her information about what the capacity was for our internal medicine clinic, for our surgical clinic, our family practice clinic, our pediatrics clinic. Because as she had town hall meetings, she could have 1,000 people there, basically demanding, what is your capacity? And we need to be seen. So it was a huge shift DOD-wide during 90 to 94. I got really good training and experience.
Yeah, you kind of got thrown into it.
Thrown into the fire, yes.
Oh my gosh. So, okay, and that was your last, the word just escaped my head. Your last duty
Right.
station, basically.
Yeah, and it was, and for medical, there are so many offshoots. It was my last hospital duty station that I ever had. I have to think about that. Yeah. I never worked in the hospital again. I worked in clinics. I worked in recruiting. I worked in staff jobs, Pentagon, headquarters, Navy fleet. Never worked in a hospital again after that. But the knowledge that I had received in that Navy hospital and the Air Force hospital in Austin, Texas, allowed me to then later on become an executive in healthcare administration.
Right. So now I could probably guess, but I'm going to have you say it. Out of all of those duty stations that you had been to, did you have one that just stood out as your favorite? And what would that have been?
So when I left Pensacola, it was 1994, and they were finally allowing women into combat. I mean, we were like right on the edge. And so I actually had orders. I was penciled in, not orders in hand, to go to Hawaii, to go to my dream job. However, as they were letting women into the Fleet Marine Force, because you could go shipboard or you could go Fleet Marine Force. And I chose, it's called Blue Side, which is ships, or Green Side, which is FMF. And I loved the Marines. I loved their comportment. I loved their drive, their passion, their arrogance. I thrived. So I asked, believe it or not, to have my assignment canceled. And I was assigned to 2nd Medical Battalion, 2nd Force Service Support Group, 2nd MEF at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. It was my best duty station, my hardest duty station, and my commanding officer committed suicide. So good, bad, and really ugly. Oh,
goodness. That's really tough. So how were you able to get over that? I mean, that's a big thing to happen.
So same like everything else I just told you, Gina, I got good news and bad news. The good news is, yeah, we canceled your Hawaii assignment and we're sending you with the Fleet Marine Force. The bad news is you got 2 weeks to get there. And I was graduating with my graduate degree. I barely made June 17th. I barely made the graduation, and I had to get in my car and boom, drive to Camp Lejeune. And the XO of the 2nd Medical Battalion, he wanted me there yesterday because the guy that I relieved was already forward deployed in support of something called Operation Sea Signal at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. And that was my defining moment because I relieved him. But the day that I got there to 2nd Medical Battalion, the XO said, I need you to come in now. Don't go check into the personnel, PSD, Personnel Support Detachment. I need you to come here now. He kept me there from 2 p.m. till 7 p.m. at night. Legal pad sheets, 10 pages front and back of notes of all the messed up things. The messed up things that he needed me to fix like yesterday. That was my welcome aboard. You're coming, you're not going to go through your orientation and processing. And no, you're not going to go to 2 weeks of field duty to get your 782 gear and, learn how to be a medic to the Fleet Marine Force. Forget all that. You're coming to work now. So on June 30th of 1994, I went to work now. The problem was our commanding officer was under investigation. Unbeknownst to me, I didn't know, because I walk in and I'm new. Why would I know? But there were some things that had happened that even his wife didn't know, actually none of it, that he was under investigation for. Meantime, I have something, those Marines that are listening will know this. I had to get ready for something called a FASMO inspection. A FASMO inspection can shut down, a FASMO inspection failure can get a commanding officer relieved of a Fleet Marine Force. We were a force service support group, which meant medical, logistics, motor T, everyone that is support to the warfighters. And so a FASMO inspection, if you fail, which is administration, operations, again, motor T, just logistics in general, it's the administration part of how a battalion runs. And we were one of, I believe, 7 support battalions under the 2nd Force Service Support Group. So I didn't even know what FASMO was. I just knew I was handed this checklist and said, okay, in approximately 8 weeks, these inspectors are going to come. And if we fail, you're getting fired. And I remember the XO telling me that you're getting fired.
Well,
but
I just got here.
I just got here. It didn't matter. So the lieutenant who I relieved, who later became, years later, the commanding officer of 2nd Medical Battalion, Lieutenant Efren Signs. He called me from Cuba, and we did a 4-hour turnover on the phone. And so he told me, he said, I can help you get through this FASMO inspection, but you need to write down everything I say. If you don't understand anything, call me, or not call me, excuse me, email me. He said, but you can do this. He said, but it's going to be the hardest thing. The next 6 weeks are going to be the hardest thing you've ever done. Oh my God, he was right. Because not only were we preparing for this inspection, but my commanding officer was being investigated. And so I was the personnel and admin officer. I was what's called the S1, and I was the legal officer. So during that time, as I'm preparing for this FASMO inspection, my commanding officer comes to me with my legal petty officer, an E6. And we had gotten an IG hotline complaint. And he goes, Gina, I'm going to take this hotline complaint personally. I'm going to personally investigate it, and I'm going to, take care of it. What saved me in that moment, a voice, God, divine intervention, the universe said, write a memo for the record and get him to sign it. That's what saved me, because I got investigated by the Naval Criminal Investigative Services. So I said, per Commander Ralph Rankin, he's taking this for action. I had my petty officer countersign it. I signed it. The CO signed it, and I handed it off to him. Well, come to find out, he was covering up for the 2 people that had the complaint. He was part of this collusion. He had recruited this E5 and this E7 chief, RP2 and an E7 chief, to be part of this scandal. That's just the best way to say it, because it's not important what the details were. I didn't know that. I didn't know he was involved. Why would I, right? I just got there.
Yep.
So time goes on. The FASMO inspection comes. By the skin of my teeth and the hair of my chinny chin chin did we pass that inspection, because I didn't know what the F I was doing. And my petty officers, we're all Navy medical people, but we're being inspected for a Marine Corps characteristic that's unique to Marine Corps battalions. But we passed. And that was all the XO and the CO cared about. We passed. It didn't matter what percentage, we passed. So that was number one. Then on the 6th of October, 1994, I found out that the commanding general, the 2nd Force Service Support Group commanding general, called my executive officer, Captain Greg Hewitt, and said, I just called the CO. He's with all the other commanding officers, with the Surgeon General of the Navy, the Vice Admiral in Washington, D.C. So I called him to come back. He's going to be back tonight. I'm relieving him of command tomorrow morning. So the XO then calls a bunch of us officers in. We're very junior. Keep in mind, I'm a frocked lieutenant, which is something that's done in the Navy when you're going to a command that you're filling a billet that's higher than the rank you are. So I was selected for 03, but I still was getting paid for as an 02. But everybody thought I was an 03. So the Marines that were 01s and 2s called me ma'am, saluted me, and they did anything I told them to do. It was really amazing. But a medical person had that kind of influence over a Marine, logistician or a motor T. So he calls us all together. He said, look, here's what's happening. The CO is going to be relieved of command in the morning. We're not sure what's going to happen, but, I've put my hat in the ring, to be the acting commander. Well, the CO came back about 1800, which is 6 p.m., and the XO met him. And he said, okay, I see the commanding general tomorrow morning. And, I don't really know what he wants to talk to me about, but the XO knew. And he said, so, I'm going to go get a good night's sleep. Now, what was unique about my CO is that so we're at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. He was geographically separated. His family lived in Charleston, South Carolina, which was his last duty station. So he actually had a boat at the marina, a sailboat that he slept on every night. Sometimes he slept in the CO's office on his couch, but if it was bad weather, but mostly he slept on the boat. Well, apparently what happened that night, it's not funny, but I just have to, when I think back, he didn't go to the boat. He went to the Hampton Inn in Jacksonville, North Carolina, and he slit his wrist 7 inches this way, and he died by exsanguination, which is bleeding out. He died. So the next morning, the XO's calling us in, like, we got to go on a manhunt. The CO didn't show up for the commanding general's meeting. Nobody knows where he is. He's not on the sailboat. We already checked. Where is he? So at 2 o'clock that afternoon, the Hampton Inn couldn't get in the door because he had it barricaded. Well, they finally got in and they found, he was dead. He didn't leave a suicide note. He never told his wife that he was under investigation. He was going to be relieved of command. So I get, because of my experience in the Air Force and my first Navy duty station, I become the casualty officer for my commanding officer's death. And the reason for that was because I had been trained as a decedent affairs officer, which means any active duty death that occurred on the base I was assigned to, I was one of usually 1 or 2 other people that knew how to negotiate with the contracted funeral home, how to dress the service member in the proper, service dress uniforms, how to basically execute, a military funeral, with honors. So here I am again. I'm not even a 03. I'm a frocked 03. I'm a second lieutenant junior grade. Now I'm dealing with a very distraught widow a couple hundred miles away in Charleston, South Carolina. And the best thing that happened to me was a lieutenant commander called me and he said, look, I'm the on-scene casualty assistance calls officer. He says, I'm notifying the widow like imminently that her husband's dead with the chaplain, with the doctor. And, do you have any advice for me? Is there anything you can share with me? And I shared with him what I could, that he didn't leave a suicide note. And and also I had to go identify his remains. I had to identify it. Yes, this is Commander Ralph Rankin, my commanding officer. And then I had to, deal with the funeral home and have his body transported. But the unique thing, the most unusual thing was I had to drive his car from the hotel, back to the base. And in his car was all kinds of stuff that just I shouldn't have seen. The guy was not right mentally. Obviously, he committed suicide. But I was exposed to things that totally blew my mind. And I was really messed up bad. And so meantime, I have to keep my comportment and be respectful, because the wife is calling me every hour wanting updates. Where's my husband's body? What's happening? Has he been embalmed? Has he been dressed in the uniform? Send me pictures, what uniform he's in, and rightfully so, because she did not know he was under investigation and being relieved of command. That was something she found out in the first 48 hours of her husband's death, suicide. So I had to answer some really, really, really hard questions. And I was just honest. At that point, I didn't care. It's like, I'm talking to a widow. He left behind a 5-year-old daughter and a 6-year-old son, and she did not know anything. So I kind of made the command decision that I told her to a degree the things I knew. And then you also do something in the military where it's called purification, where you get rid of shit. You get rid of stuff that the family doesn't need to see, like photographs in compromising positions with circumstances that a service member should never have been in. And so every time you're involved in, you discover more evidence and more evidence. We discovered in his desk drawer all these notes of how I must remain strong. I'm the warrior and I can't falter. And the rantings. And then on his sailboat, all these photographs. And there were three of us, a Marine, an ensign, and then me. Again, the Lieutenant J.G. Frock to Lieutenant, that collected all this stuff and burned it. We didn't even document what it was. We just said, you know what? We're not writing this shit down. We're not. And we were never called in. We were nobody. Our chain of command fucking failed us.
Yeah.
They got a sprint team to come down, 12 psychiatrists, psychologists, and psych techs, because the battalion was shattered. We had 250 Marines, 250 sailors who knew nothing. Now keep in mind, I remembered that incident, that hotline complaint that he had me, I made the memo for record, that was in my mind. And so I knew he had been involved in some really shady stuff, but I didn't really understand it until his death and until we saw all the other stuff. And I got post-traumatic stress disorder out of it, PTSD, but it was delayed. So we had a big shuffle. The psych folks came, debriefed everybody. The ward room, I'd say there was about 14 officers. They were going around the conference table. How did you feel when you first heard the news? How did you feel? It came to me. I said, let me tell you how I fucking felt. I had to go identify my CO's dead body. I had to take him to the funeral home, saw him naked because we had to dress him from socks up, and had to deal with his widow hour by hour by hour for 72 hours. And right now, I don't know if I want to remain in the military, because if the military can do this to a senior leader who is top number one in his family practice class, top 1% of his medical school class, then what the fuck is it going to do to me? As a Frock Lieutenant JG. That's how I answered them. But you know what? Nobody ever followed up with me. Nobody ever talked to me. Nobody said, are you okay? But here's what happened. So my new XO, now the guy that had done a 4-hour turnover with me that was forward deployed to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, he got promoted lieutenant commander. In the process, he became our executive officer. That man saved my life. He called me in. He goes, Gina, you need a change of scenery. I got here June 30th. October 7th, the CO committed suicide. He said, December 2nd, he said, I would like to deploy you to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. And I said, get me the fuck out of here. Yes. Get me out of here. So for 6 months, I had the best job I ever had in my entire life that I will ever have. I served 52,000 Cubans, children, moms and dads, single men, women, elderly, that were fighting for their lives to leave Cuba and come to the United States. They created anything that would float, and they all collectively got on rafts or makeshift rafts and headed for Key West or Miami, wherever they could go. And God, the universe, gave me purpose. And all I did for 6 months was to focus solely on helping those people, getting them the medical care they need. I was the senior medical plans officer for Operation Sea Signal, and I worked at the headquarters. I worked directly for the commanding general. And so I had to create what's called these manpower medical packages. All right, we have 1,400 pediatric children. What do we need? Okay, so we need a team of pediatricians to come do medical exams on all the kids. And as they were being prioritized, we were siblings, anybody associated with that child, parents, grandparents, and sometimes it would be a list of 10 people. They all got evacuated to the United States. I had the privilege to work with non-governmental agencies, as well as governmental agencies like immigration and naturalization, non-governmental agencies like community relations services, who were finding families and organizations to sponsor these folks into the United States. But the most rewarding thing that I got to do was work with a team of former Cuban exiles called the Miami Medical Team, led by Dr. Alzugaray. These people would go around the world, especially South America and into the Caribbean, and would work on behalf of anyone in those particular regions that were basically oppressed and Spanish speaking. And this team would come every Friday by noon. They flew in a little plane, 10-person plane. They'd come every Friday at noon. We would have patients lined up, specialty patients that need to see ophthalmologists, that needed to see internal medicine doctors, that needed to see, some of them had skin conditions. And so all evening Friday, all day Saturday for 14 hours, and Sunday until 2 p.m. That's all they did. And my job for those 3 days was to make sure that they got their lodging, their food, and they got to the clinics where they needed to be. And then when they debriefed on Friday, I took the notes, because we had 2 air transportable hospitals deployed there and a naval hospital fixed facility. And then I took that information and I shared it, because we would have to do follow-up care, with those people. But there was a period of time in that assignment when they lost hope, because the process to get them out of there was so slow and communication was so poor at that time, that they started rioting, and they started intentionally wounding themselves, because they learned that if they had severe injuries, they could get medevaced. I would get a C9 Nightingale Air Force plane to come in, and it had surgical teams on it, and we get the patient stabilized, and then we would put the trauma patients on there. But then the family got to go with them too, and we were constantly running these flights 3 and 4 times a week, because they were going crazy. They were injuring themselves. And so when we brought the Miami Medical Team in, as coordinated by the State Department in Washington, D.C., they helped us calm them down, and we started having town hall meetings, and we identified 110 medical folks among the 52,000 migrants. And we got them all the white Dr. Kildare, coats, got them stethoscopes, and empowered them to have their own Cuban speaking clinics within the camps.
Oh, wow.
It
That
was
had to have been such a huge milestone for you, and a real good healing moment too.
Yes.
Now I know we're getting close to time here, so I did want to throw out to our chat, those in the chats, those who are listening and not in the chats, if you have questions for Gina, go ahead and put those out there now. We did have a message from Christopher Aldis, and he said, thank you, Carolee and Gina. He has to head out. Outstanding conversation, and we really appreciate you being here.
Thank
now,
you.
For those of you who have not already, please go out at the end of this and like this particular segment, share it, hit that notification bell, and also subscribe, please, because it just means the world that we can get. The more people we can get this out to and shared to, the more veterans we can also include on these channels. So appreciate that. So while we wait for a couple of questions, so you ended up retiring at after how many years?
28 years active duty, 7 enlisted Air Force, and 21 Navy. And I went to school and I got a clinical mental health counseling degree, but I didn't seek licensure, because I decided to be a life coach. And I formed a nonprofit called Rugged Warrior Healing Coalition. And people like Travis Partington, Inez Mutard, Kai McGee, Stephanie Grant, Juanita Terry, they are my supporters. And our mission, our heart, our passion is to reduce the suicide footprint. So just like my commanding officer committed suicide in October 7th of 1994, we want to do what we can to help people with resilience and tell their story and connect with other veterans for inspiration, hope. Chris Aldis, that was just on, he's a retired Master Chief, Force Master Chief for the Pacific. He has a thing called Turn 2 Project. He's developed something called Man Camp, and specifically for men, to help men, reconnect and find purpose in their life. And what's wonderful about Travis is he's done Oscar Mike Radio, identifying veterans in action, mission and flight. And it's these people that are making a difference. All those that I just mentioned, plus thousands of others that are really giving hope, connection, helping people find resilience and meaning in their life.
I agree 100%. And it sounds like you've got a great support system, and I know a couple of those that you have mentioned. So, and Travis Partington, great human being and a wonderful friend, and I'm really enjoying getting to know him a little bit more, as well as yourself and others in this network that we've grown. So, really excited about that. So, now, it's my understanding that there was a book that has been written. Tell me a little bit about that, if you can.
Yes, ma'am. So just real quick, Rugged Warrior Healing Coalition started as a social project on Facebook. And I was trying to connect with the women and the men, veteran communities I was part of, to see what kind of needs, how could we help people? So in the process, I met a lady named Sheila Farr, who's former Air Force. And Sheila had participated in numerous books that are called anthologies. And you think of it like Reader's Digest or the books Chicken Soup for the Soul. And it's where you get together with like-minded people to tell a story based on a subject. So I called it the Veterans Unchained Project because as a post-traumatic stress survivor, I had felt often like I had a chain wrapped around my soul. And so the Veterans Unchained, the first book was called Breaking the Chain of Trauma, One Link at a Time. 19 women veterans told their story, May of 2022, and it's on Amazon. And then in November of 2022, Chris Aldis, Travis Partington, Inez Mutard, and a handful of others, we wrote Veterans Unchained 2.0, Lessons Learned. So as we brought the men into the storytelling, I felt like, while talking about trauma is important, let's talk about the lessons we learned in our military service and what types of tools of resiliency did we learn to overcome those. Almost everyone in the projects, both books, has some type of level of post-traumatic stress, or if they didn't have an actual diagnosis, they certainly experienced trauma like most human beings. Right. And it was the stories of connection and survival and resilience that, basically gives people hope. And then there's more books coming. We're getting ready to republish Veterans Unchained 2.0, Lessons Learned, with updated stories of where the veterans, the things they're doing now, because many of the folks in the original project 3 years later are doing some high level things to help veterans heal. So you can get those books on, again, Veterans Unchained 2.0 on Amazon. And excellent. The main thing is just connection, and networking with people to establish hope, and encouragement.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Gina. For everybody out there, I'm not seeing any questions for you, Gina, but for everybody out there, I want to say thank you again for joining in, supporting Gina, and being there and supporting this channel as well. Again, as a reminder, I am not going to be having a show next Sunday because I will be helping to raise money for the rebuilding of the Tun Tavern in Pennsylvania. So, but we will be back that following Sunday. If in the meantime you guys have questions, or there's any veteran out there that is interested in becoming a guest on my channel, you can go and email me, conversationswithavet@gmail.com. So look forward to seeing you all next time. And in the process, when I find a good day to do the giveaway, I will be doing a video for that so that we can make sure we have everybody participating. So Gina, if you want to hold tight for me, thank you also very much for coming on and telling your story, as well as, just being you. So I appreciate it. And thank you for your sacrifice as well.
I love you, Carolee. You're awesome. Thank you for what you do.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, everybody. Y'all have a wonderful, wonderful evening and rest of your week.